Okay, Parshas Vayechi, which is on page 268. I apologize in advance. I have a slight cold, a non-COVID illness. So please forgive me.
I just recovered from a cold.
Oy, it's going around.
I'm going to have to move over here. I'm sorry. I know we
No problem. Not insulted. Not insulted at all. If the places were reversed, I would also move. Okay, so we have in this week's parsha, last week, right, all of the Jewish people. We had the very dramatic the people who didn't care about COVID all of a sudden care about a cold.
No,
I think not. No. So welcome back. So on page 268. So that's true. No one has an immune system for the past year because we've been inside, right? So I feel like everyone's going to get sick. Okay. So last week we talked about in Parshas Vayigash, a very dramatic parsha where the brothers of Yosef finally come down to Egypt and they see Yosef, who became the viceroy of Egypt, and dramatically says, "Ani Yosef, ha'od avichai, I am Joseph, is my father still alive?" Revealing himself that their brother, who they had sold into slavery many, many years ago, was still alive. Not only was he alive, he was thriving as the viceroy of Egypt in that very dramatic scene. And after he tells the brothers to bring down Yaakov and the entire family to settle in Egypt. It's very, very interesting. This is really from last week's parsha, but we could talk about it. I didn't talk about it last week. So how did Yosef prove to Yaakov that it was really him who was viceroy of Egypt? Maybe he was an imposter. He hadn't seen him for a couple decades. So he sent agalos. He sent wagons. Now, why was that a siman? Why was that a special sign? Agalos, because it's the same word in Hebrew as egla, or a calf. And the last thing that they were studying together, Yosef and his father studying Torah, was the Laws of Eglarufa. It's about a certain thing, a sacrifice that's done, a certain type of, let's call it an offering for lack of a better term, that's done when a dead body is found in between two cities. So the elders of the city go out, and to atone for the fact that somebody died, they bring this Eglarufa, this calf they sacrifice. It's not really sacrifice, they break its neck in the valley.
When Yosef and Yaakov were studying?
Right,
how could they be studying Torah if it wasn't revealed yet?
Oh, so they studied Torah. They were prophets. So they were prophets. Abraham, it says, studied Torah. Yitzchak studied Torah. Yaakov studied Torah. They had it through prophecy. Hashem spoke to them. So they knew what was going to be in the Torah. So the last thing that they were studying was Eglarufa. So Yosef sent him agalos, wagons, to show that he was telling him, look, it's really me, Yosef, because I remember what we were learning together, 20 whatever years ago. What's interesting about that, there was a story, like why specifically that to remind them? So there's a story about the Vilna Gaon. There was, back in Europe, if a woman's husband disappeared, she was done. She couldn't get remarried most of the time because he might still be alive somewhere else. There was a woman whose husband left her, and many, many years later, a man came back and said, "I'm your husband," and he knew. They're like, "Well, you don't look familiar. Like, prove it." But he knew all about her family, knew all about the town, knew all about the business, and everyone was saying, "This must be your husband if he knows so much information." So they asked the Vilna Gaon, "Are we allowed to let him go back with her wife? Can we trust him that this is the right guy?" So the Vilna Gaon says, "Let's wait here. Let's see something." So he goes to the man and says, "Please come into the synagogue with me." And he says, "Before you left, where did you sit in synagogue?" And the guy didn't know. So he says, "You're an imposter." And he had finally admitted it. He says, "You're right, I met her husband years ago, and I drilled him for information, and I was pretending to be him." So why did the Vilna Gaon ask him, "Where's my seat in synagogue?" Because this guy's obviously a bad guy. He's a trickster, he's a fraudster, and fraudsters don't think about holy matters. Right? He would think to ask the husband about everything, to remember it, but to think about where I sit in synagogue, fraudsters aren't thinking about synagogue. That's not in their furthest thing from their mind. So the Vilna Gaon knew, if I ask him where did he sit in synagogue, if he doesn't know that, then it's not the real guy. He never would have thought to get that information. So Yosef sent his father to show him, I'm still Yosef, I'm still a proud Jew. I remember what we were studying together. We were studying Torah, and he sent him that special siman, that special thing that was very significant. Why he sent it. So that was really last week's parsha. So this week's parsha, Yaakov, everyone's down in Egypt. They live in the land of Goshen, which is separate from the rest of Egypt. And Yaakov is about to die. He's on his deathbed, and he's blessing the people. That's where blessing his children, the 12 tribes. That's where our parsha picks up. Now, let's go to page 272. Page 272, 48:20. The last verse on the line. So, famously, what?
No, I'm just
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
where it takes place. Yes, right.
Right, so we'll say, just summarize the page here. Yosef had two sons, Efraim and Menashe, and famously, Yosef brings the two sons to Yaakov to get blessed by their grandfather before he passes away. And he puts the older one in front and the older one and the younger one. So Yosef positions him so that Menashe, the older one, will receive the right hand, the more prominent hand, and Ephraim, the younger one, will receive the left hand, which is the less prominent hand. What does Yaakov do? We know, switches his hands so that the right hand goes on the younger son, Ephraim, and the left hand goes on the older son, Menashe. And then the pasuk says, the verse says, "Vayivarchi bayom hahu lemor." He blessed them on that day, saying, "B'cha yivarech Yisrael." By you shall Israel be blessed. Yesimcha Elokim ke'Ephraim v'chem Menashe. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. The verse is saying that the Jewish people in the future should be blessed in the name of Ephraim and Menashe. And this is what every father blesses his children on Friday night. May you be blessed to be like Ephraim and Menashe. V'yasem es Ephraim lifnei Menashe. And he put Ephraim before Menashe.
If one doesn't have a father not doing her so, can the mother do it?
Sure. The mother does it also. Mother,
But
both
mother
should.
to son and father to daughter?
Yeah, totally, both. Okay, so now, some questions here. Why specifically, this is Rav David Feinstein asks, many others ask, why specifically do we bless our children? Why is the Torah telling us to bless our children, that they should be like Ephraim and Menashe? There were many great Jews throughout history. Abraham, we just read about, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron.
Could it have something to do with these brothers never quarreled? Ephraim and Menashe?
You have to stop giving away the end of my class.
The whole plot.
That is something we're going to.
Graduate early, right?
That is something we'll discuss. That is an answer
I'm not gonna
given.
be that horny.
No, I'm just kidding. That's a very good. I have written down here from Rabbi Felder from Toronto says an answer to what you're saying. That answer, but let's get back to that. I have three different answers here, different by different rabbis, and each teaches an important idea. The question is, why do we bless the children, Ephraim and Menashe? And also, Rav David Feinstein asks a second question, not specifically why do we bless them, that he should be like Ephraim and Menashe, but what does a blessing do to make somebody holy? We all, Jewish people, believe, unlike other religions, some religions don't believe this, we have free will. You want to be a righteous person, so choose to do the right thing. You don't need a blessing for that. Right? They say stories of certain, like, you know what a Litvak is? Litvak? Very... from Lithuanian Jews known to be very intellectual and very straight. So they say about certain Litvische Rabbanim, Litvische rabbis, they would ask him for a blessing, and they would say to him, "What are you, an apple? Like a blessing? I bless an apple. I don't bless a person." And it's kind of a point there. Why do you go big rabbis for a blessing? You want to be a blessing, you should be a tzaddik, a righteous person. You want to be a righteous person, so do the right thing. Yeah, you're faced with a choice between good and evil. Do good. You'll be a righteous person. How's a blessing going to help with that? So that's the second question Rav David Feinstein asked. What's the point of giving this blessing in the first place? So let's answer the second question first. So the second question is that it says that we have something called the Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination. There's that little guy on our shoulder.
Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah, well he would be the good inclination. Jiminy Cricket was trying to get you to do the good thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a devil because the concept of a devil is foreign to you.
Right, yeah, that's all. Everything we have in our head is definitely from the Christian culture of what it is. But there is a negative spiritual force, which really exists. It's a spiritual force, not tangible, which tries to get us to do evil. And our job in this world is to overcome that negative spiritual force and choose to do good through holiness. And it says that if we don't have the help of Hashem, that negative spiritual force would be so powerful, it would be impossible for us to overcome it on our own. It's just impossible. Look at we can all think, when you're sitting in synagogue on Yom Kippur, it's very easy to say, "Oh, I'm going to beat the Yetzer Hara. I'm going to overcome any temptation I ever have." But then 5 minutes later, you're out and, someone cuts you off on the way home from shul after Ne'ilah and you say, "Oh, yes, sir." Right? Start cursing already and doing that or whatever. So the Yetzer Hara is very tricky. And we've talked about how the evil inclination tricks people and how he makes people think that they can't overcome them. So without Hashem's help, It's impossible. A person can't do it. So the reason that we get a blessing is that we're asking, where a person should get blessed to be a tzaddik, that God should help them to overcome the Yetzer Hara. God should send them that help, because a human being can't do it alone. So part of overcoming the Yetzer Hara, it's not just simply that we're a human being and we have to choose to do good or evil. We also have to pray, and part of praying is to receive blessings. If there's a tzaddik, a righteous person, a person's father and mother should bless them, that God should help them overcome the evil inclination, because we need Hashem's help. And it's important to note that all a person has to do to merit Hashem's help is to try a little bit. Judaism is not an all or nothing religion. Meaning a person shouldn't say, well, I don't wear a fur hat and live in Lakewood, so there's really no point in doing anything. That is the improper perspective. Every single mitzvah we do out of the 613, Hashem loves us for. And what the Yetzer Hara likes to do is to tell us, it's impossible to keep the Torah, so just forget it. It's all or nothing. But in fact, the Medrash says, Pischuli Pesach kechudash al machad. Hashem says, if you make an opening for me, like the eye of a needle, right? Vani eftach lechem kepischo shel ulam. I will open for you an opening as grand as an entrance to a beautiful banquet hall. I mean, if I try just a little bit, if I make that first step, Hashem will take me the rest of the way. They said like a story of two people climbing a mountain. They're both trying, and they see the mountain's so high. One guy says, "I give up. I can't do it. Forget about it." Just gives up, turns away. And the guy says, "You know what? I'm going to keep trying. I don't know if I can make it, but I'm going to keep trying." And he gets halfway up the mountain, all of a sudden he sees an elevator. The elevator takes him the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. That's what it's like. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we think, keep Shabbos? It's crazy. I can't keep Shabbos. Okay, you know what? Maybe I'll light candles Friday night before Shabbos starts. I'll do that. That I can do. And then all of a sudden you see Hashem helps me, provides other opportunities for me to keep Shabbos. I realize that it wasn't so hard as I thought. Little things that we try. The point is, one is that the Yetzer Hara likes to make us think that it's all or nothing, and two, the Yetzer Hara likes to make us think, I should just give up. There's no point. We try just a little bit. You can have a whole situation can change in the blink of an eye, and we don't even realize it. Now that was the second question. The first question is, why specifically do we bless the children in the name of Ephraim and Menashe? Why not other great religious people, Jewish people, like Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe? So to repeat what Shlomo said, that think about what's going on here. Ephraim and Menashe. Menashe is the older brother, and Ephraim's the younger brother. How's the older brother going to feel if his older brother is more important than him, more prominent? I read, I'm not going to say who it is, there's a certain late night TV host whose older brother was very jealous of him because he was the younger brother and he was so successful, making millions of dollars, and he wasn't. So they could create a lot of animosity, a lot of hatred between the brothers, a lot of jealousy because the younger brother is more successful than the older brother. But Ephraim and Menashe, they loved each other so much, even though the younger brother was really more successful and more righteous. So that's one thing that Rabbi Felder says. That's why we bless our children to be like Ephraim and Menashe, because that was a great a great character trait that they had. And the other thing is that usually, as we get farther and farther away from the source of spirituality, which is really the giving of the Torah, the further away we get from that, usually we say that the generations decrease in their spiritual level. But Ephraim and Menashe actually went up a level, because we find that the level under Yaakov, like first you have Abraham, then you have Yitzchak, then you have Yaakov, then after that you have the 12 tribes. So Ephraim and Menashe should have been a level below the 12 tribes, because they were not Yaakov's children, but Yaakov's grandchildren. But we find that Ephraim and Menashe were bumped up to the point that when the Jewish people entered Israel, the land was divided up amongst the 12 tribes, and Ephraim and Menashe were considered part of the 12 tribes. So usually you find that the generations go down, but here, since the generations went up, they uplifted themselves to be like a previous generation, so that was also another important character trait that they had to bless them. So that's what Rav Felder says from Toronto. Now, Rav David Feinstein says that what was unique about Ephraim and Menashe that was different from their cousins? All of their cousins grew up in Israel and were children grew up next to Yaakov, grandchildren of Yaakov Avinu. That is a very... So the other cousins, they lived in Israel, and they were grandchildren of Yaakov, and they studied with Yaakov. they became. It's not so hard to become a great person. Imagine if your grandfather was like Rav Malkiel Cutler in Lakewood, and you grew up in his house, and you're always studying Torah with him. So you also become a great person. All right, that's impressive, but still, look what you had. Ephraim and Menashe grew up in Egypt. Egypt was the most decadent culture of the time. There's actually a commandment in the Torah to not be like Egyptians, to not be like people in Egypt. So the fact that they became so holy and achieved so much in their spirituality, even though they were in such a disgusting, decadent place, is a reason that they should be blessed. Is the reason that that we should bless them in their name. And Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, I just heard this from Rabbi Leiter a few days ago. He was speaking between Mincha and Marav on Tuesday night. And Rav Zalman Sorotzkin kind of expands on this idea a little more. He said, let's think about it here. Who were Ephraim and Menashe exactly? So Yosef was the second in command in Egypt. Right? Egypt was not a democracy. The king, the Pharaoh said something, his word was law. Yosef was second in command to Pharaoh. So Yosef's kids, they were pretty important people. They were like the princes, pretty much. They were like the William and Harry of their day, most eligible bachelors in Egypt. Anyone would have wanted to marry them. I'm sure the girls were going wild over Ephraim and Menashe, all the Egyptian women, and they could have gotten into any university they wanted to. Egypt had a lot of culture, a lot of intellectual achievements they could have done. They could have gone to that. Where did they go? They went to Goshen, this little ghetto, and they studied Torah with their grandfather, with Yaakov. And it's like instead, they're like the most wealthy people living in Manhattan, and instead of going to the party scene at night, they go to like Borough Park to study with some rabbi. That's really what was going on. But it wasn't just they were like stom people. They weren't just like regular guys. They were like the most eligible bachelors in the country. Like everybody wanted to marry them. Everyone wanted them. They could have been like, the most important people in Egypt. But what did they choose to do? We're going to learn Torah with our grandfather in Goshen. So because of that, they were able to become so spiritual and, how they say in Yiddish, steig. Steig? Verstehst? Steig in Yiddishkeit and steig in learning, given that culture which was antagonistic to Judaism. So that's why we bless our children in the names of Ephraim and Menashe. And I think we can relate more to growing up in a culture antagonistic to God and religion than, I lived in Mea Shearim for a year when I went to yeshiva. So that was a culture where like everything revolved around Torah and everything revolved around, Judaism. That's one thing, that was like a real shtetl. But now, we live in New Jersey, right, in the United States. We don't exactly live in a bastion of Torah. When we want to grow in Torah, we have to really fight against the outside culture. So it has to come from within it. I think we have a lot more in common with Ephraim and Menashe that we think. So we're giving that blessing, and they knew that the Jewish people are going to be in exile. We're not always going to have our country Israel where we can make the culture the way we want it, where we can, right? I lived in also Yeshiva Lane in Baltimore. So there, the whole culture was about Torah study and serving Hashem. So it's a little easier to be part of that, everyone's going to Minyan on time, I'm also going to go to Minyan on time. Everyone's learning X amount of hours a day, I'm also going to do it. So, but then you move to a culture that's not like that. It has to come from within. So you have to, build up that foundation. Now, I think it's definitely better to live in a culture like that, like where there's Torah all around, or at least if you're starting out, you should start out that way so you build a foundation. But practically, many people can't do that. So our inspiration has to come from within. And that has to do with the first point that we were saying, that to be successful, we need Hashem's help to do it. But if we just try a little bit, Hashem will help us the rest of the way. Now, I want to bring there's a third answer about this from my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Aaron Feldman. He said that, now why don't we bless our children to be like Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Right? They were seemingly on a higher level than Ephraim and Menashe.
Why don't we?
Right, that's what I'm coming to answer now.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to understand.
Oh, why don't we? Right.
Why don't we?
Why don't we? So the reason is because the avos, the forefathers, an important concept in Judaism is that the forefathers were on a totally different level than the rest of the Jewish people. By that I mean when the forefathers did something, what they did, those attributes and those spiritual heights which they accomplished, was transferred to the DNA of the Jewish people. That the Jewish people, it would become part of them what they accomplished. For example, Yitzchak was ready to give his life for God. Abraham took him to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him, and Yitzchak willingly went, was ready to give his life because God said so. That gave to all of his descendants, all of the Jewish people, the ability, which Jews have always had, the ability to give up their lives for God. And you find this throughout Jewish history. Even people that were not religious at all, when somebody said convert or die, more often than not, they were ready to die than convert. Where did Jews get that from? They got that because one of our forefathers, Yitzchak, passed a test and grew in that spiritual height, so he transferred that attribute. It became part of the spiritual DNA of the Jewish people. Same thing, Abraham was known for his kindness, so Jews are always known to be kind. Just to give you an example, the kindness of Jews is unbelievable. I was raising money for something recently, for two young people that needed something, and was able to raise Jewish people that didn't even know these people thousands of dollars within a week. They sent because they wanted to help. What other people do you have like that? They don't even know them, and they just send you checks for thousands of dollars. Several people send checks for thousands of dollars to help some kids. Where do you have something like that? Where do you have a people like that? Where did Jews become like that? Because Avraham Avinu was the epitome of kindness, and that became part of all of his descendants of the Jewish people. So when we say that to become part of the spirituality, the spiritual makeup of the Jewish people, that's only about the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. After that, doesn't apply. So it's not possible to bless somebody to be like Abraham. That was a separate category. We can't be like that. But who could we be like? We could be like Efraim and Menashe, the next generation. The next generation was charged with taking those attributes and passing it down to future generations. So we can't be like Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, because there's not going to be anybody who's going to impact the entire Jewish people to change the spiritual DNA. But what we could be like is we could be like Efraim and Menashe to take that and bring it to the next generation. So that's why we bless our kids to be like Ephraim and Menashe. Okay, I was going to talk about one thing. Let's talk about one more quick idea. I had another thing, but I think it's going to be too long, so I'll just talk about one more quick idea. There's so you know who's buried in Maras Machpelah and in Hebron, the cave in Hebron, the forefathers?
Who's not?
Oh, who is buried there? So you know I think we talked about it before. Who's buried in Hebron? Right, Avram, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah. Yosef is not buried there. Rachel's not buried there. Right, and Leah. And there's one other body part that's buried there. Esav's head. Did we talk about this? Why is Esav's head buried there? Because he wasn't a good person, but one thing he did was he honored his parents, so he merited that his head be buried in Maras Machpelah. So how did Esav's head become detached from his body? There's a very interesting medrash about this. After Yaakov dies, he gives the blessings to the children, and he passes away. He said, "Do not bury me in Egypt." There's several reasons why he didn't want to be buried in Egypt, but all of his children take him to Israel to bury him in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah. When they get there, who's standing there? Esav. Esav says to them, "You can't bury him there. I own this cave." They say, "What are you talking about? Our father owns this cave." And he says, "Prove it to me. You have a document that shows it's yours?" And they said, "Oh, what are we going to do?" So they said, "Naphtali," he's the quickest one. He said, go back to Egypt, get the document, and come back." So all this is going on. Hushim ben Dan, who was Yaakov's grandson, you know what he does? He took out a sword, and he decapitated Esav, and his head rolled into the cave. That's the medrash. Right. No, it was on purpose, totally on purpose. Now,
Hushim ben Dan?
Hushim ben Dan.
I never heard of Hushim ben Dan.
Hushim ben Dan was Dan's son, who was Yaakov's grandfather. You know what was unique about Hushim ben Dan? He was
grandfather or grandson?
Yaakov's grandson.
Grandson. Okay.
Grandson, Dan's son. What was unique about Hushim ben Dan is that he was deaf. Now, why was it that the one grandchild who was deaf was the one to decapitate Esav? So this is what happens. Esav really here kind of is similar to the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Everyone else could hear what was going on. Esav says, "Hey, this is my field." They say, "No, it's not. It's ours." And they started having a back and forth. So he started making sense. Oh, maybe we have to bring proof. This and that. Hushim ben Dan didn't know what was going on. He didn't follow the conversation. All he saw, there's some red-haired man here blocking my grandfather at his funeral. I don't care what he's saying. I can't hear him. Took matter into his own hands and cut off his head. He said, and this is how, I think Chaim Shmulevitz, I believe, says this over. This is what the Yetzer Hara does to us. First you start listening to him a little bit. Oh, the Yetzer Hara says, do this wrong, do that wrong. You think, okay, we'll have a conversation this back. Maybe I shouldn't do this, because Once you start doing that and you start answering up, probably not going to end up well in the end. You start debating the Yetzer Hara. Hushim ben Dan couldn't hear anything was going on. took matters into his own hand, cut off his head. We're burying my grandfather. I don't care who you are. I don't want to hear any ifs, ands, or buts. Meaning, don't even get involved in the conversation. The Yetzer Hara says, oh, maybe you shouldn't go to shul because it's better. I don't want to hear it. Don't talk to me. I'm not going to argue with you. I don't want to hear it. You just cut off his head, and you go. And sometimes you have to do that. When you can tell that the evil inclination is trying to debate with you, just don't even engage. Do the right thing. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and you don't get involved with all of that. They should make a movie about that scene.
Yeah.
All right, we'll stop here. There's a lot more going on in the
Rated R,
parsha.
though.
What?
Probably R rated.
Nowadays you could do a PG-13.